Good.
Hello and welcome to our 11 o'clock session. We are excited to have the entire VMLYR leadership team. I'm claiming that you guys run the whole business because I know you do. To have a conversation with us today about unpacking the inclusion experience. So that sounds like a lot. It sounds like there's a lot for you guys to cover, and I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. We have Myron King, Tasha Gilroy, Zack Tomlinson, Byrd. We have Julie Martell, and she's going to come in, but we're working out some tech issues. Teresa Barnhill, who's going to join the conversation. So again, this is our 11 o'clock session. This is the CCDC Inkwell Beach virtual session. I'm turning it over to you, Myron, to lead the conversation on unpacking in the inclusion experience.
All right, Adrian, thank you so much. Good morning, afternoon, evening to all of you. It's a privilege and honor to be part of this year's CCDC Inkwell Beach virtual sessions. And I appreciate each of you for finding the time and space to join us. My name is Myron King. I'm the Chief Integration Officer with VMLYR, and today we will be unpacking the inclusion experience. And to do that, I have an illustrious panel to help share what we're doing and why we're doing it with each of you. Tasha Gilroy, Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in our New York office. Teresa Barnhill will join us from Memphis. She's a Group Director in our Strategy and Insights Group. Julie Martell is a Director of Strategy and Insights here in Kansas City. Byrd is a Director of Experience Design here in Kansas City. And last but not least is Zack Tomlinson, a Program Manager here in Kansas City, who's been instrumental in getting us to where we are. I've had the pleasure of working with this team and a host of other remarkable people for the bulk of the last year. And we linked arms in an effort called transformation, a sweeping effort to drive action, measure progress, and enable agency employees in the acceleration of our transformation towards being a better place for BIPOC employees specifically, and for all employees broadly by way of DEI. The fundamental approach that we took in that journey was bringing the same level of depth and acumen that we bring to a digital transformation or a business transformation to ourselves in terms of culture and inclusion, belonging, equity, and diversity. And the result has been a multi-year roadmap that's led us towards real, tangible, lasting change across 8 different dimensions of our business. So for the last 12 months, we've been doing this quietly, but with great intent. And we've been treating ourselves as our own first and most important client. Last month, we decided that we had reached a point where we were ready to share what we were doing with clients across our business space and across the industry. And that offering is called Inclusion Experience, our way of bringing what we've done internally to partner with individuals, companies, brands, leaders that want to accelerate their own advancement in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion within their organizations. So we've got a little video that helps tee this up nicely, and we'd like to let that play before we get into the meat of the panel. So what we will do is we'll get that link and we'll make sure that that's shared in the chat so that everyone can see that. What the video basically explains is that inclusion experience, or IX for short, is a consulting and implementation practice. We've introduced it to help our clients accelerate their diversity, equity, and inclusion gains across the board. But there's significantly more to it than just being a consultancy or just us making turning this into a business and seizing or capitalizing on the moment. We've understood that diversity, equity, and inclusion has always been about people, but for too long, diversity, equity, and inclusion haven't been part of the business. And I'm going to start the panel off by asking Tasha, who is our expert, our subject matter expert in this field. When we talk about DEI being about people, the business is about people too. Can you help us understand how inclusion experience, or IX, might help client partners draw this connection and start to benefit from it?
Yeah, thanks for that, Myron. I'm so glad to be with my crew, with my team today, talking about IX. So to make the connection, right, I think, like you mentioned, traditionally, DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion has kind of been almost a nice to have or something extra, where we had programs and events, and there was like this internal kind of engagement that was happening around DEI. I would say that we actually have been looking at a little bit further past last year, but last year clearly brought a lot of the focus on to what organizations were actually doing and what did it actually mean to actually have a focus around diversity, equity, and inclusion, in particular, the equity piece. And so because we had so many strong client relationships, strong client connections, we did quite a bit of work, award-winning work across the business. It was easier for us to then have these conversations about the work that we were doing internally to transform our business as it related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and even belonging to what their business would be focused on. So of course, we got a lot of questions, had a lot of context in terms of people reaching out to say, can you share what you all are doing? Can you give us some support? Can you give us some help in these areas? And depending on where our clients were in their journey, some were further along, some had only started the journey of really assessing their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy or building a framework to have a strategy. We were then able to kind of step in and then kind of lead the way, guide them, and give them some advice. But always being clear about we were our first clients, right? We were doing this transformation work internally. And so for us, the insights and the progress that we've been making, I think, is also helping us to then support the information sharing, the advice, the consultation around inclusion and experience, in particular when it comes to managing people. Again, the big part of all businesses are the people, the talent, and then making sure that the equity piece is top of mind, upfront, and the big component as to where diversity, equity, and inclusion needs to be different, needs to move different now, is in that equity space for sure.
Tasha, that's really important. You said a few things that I think are going to really typify this conversation, but also typify what all agencies need to amplify and start over-indexing on. And equity is such a dense thing to unpack, and we'll talk about that, particularly in terms of experience. And Lewis is going to give us some perspective there. I have a couple of questions for you, but before we do that, we do have that video available to help reinforce some of the points that you just made about meeting our clients where they are and helping them accelerate their path towards putting people and equity at the center of business. So we'll play that and then we'll be right back.
Oh, oh, it's pretty.
No problem. So I start a ton of meetings with three simple words: grace, patience, empathy. If COVID hasn't given us anything else, it's given us the gift of connection. And we spend a lot of time working across time zone and geography and over multiple challenged internet connections. So again, when the video is available, we'll certainly share that and play it. But the video shouldn't take away from the talent that's here to talk about it. So Tasha left off with a really strong point about using our cachet in terms of award-winning work to really become a point of influence. We have great athletes working hard and doing these different things where the business is concerned. Now, when we talk about equity, there's equity in the workplace, but there's also an equity gap within the experiences that we create. And Lewis, I want to pose a question to you on that front. Being an experienced designer, what approaches do you feel are most essential to bring more diverse sets of truths into experience design, and why is inclusivity such an important aspect to that?
Thanks, Myron. Thumbs up if everyone can hear me okay. Can you hear me? All right, excellent. I think to answer your question, I think something that's very important for experience design, especially as we're talking about kind of like this convergence of culture, technology, the human experience. When we start talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, all these just different facets, something that's important when we really focus on the experience design is creating frameworks to govern things around, specifically how is technology being used. So for example, artificial intelligence, where does bias exist within the development process? So it's important to create some form of a framework around how to basically mitigate bias as best as possible. Because when we start developing products and how that impacts people's lives day in and day out, you have to have some type of guardrails in place. So something that I'm working on here within the agency is what I'm calling responsible innovation. And it's basically looking at our products and our experiences that we create and thinking about what types of guardrails can we put into place and frameworks to be able to govern all these aspects and to ensure that any experience that we're creating is basically doing things right. We're not offending people. We're not going to be basically messing up in terms of how a lot of things can take place. So that's just my position on it.
So I think it's an interesting perspective to share this notion of responsible innovation. I think people get trapped into this psychology that because we do segmentation and because we start creating monoliths, and sometimes those monoliths don't necessarily understand the nuances that exist within those communities. There are communities within communities, and even within those groups, there's nuance and texture that creates opportunity if it's understood, if it's valued, if it's contextualized. And I think that's part of what you're saying in terms of mitigating bias. It's also the flip side of it is deepening understanding, right? And the better we understand, the better questions, the deeper questions we ask. And Julie, that's where I kind of pivot to you. When we talk about questions that we pose and trying to get to these deeper levels of insight, 2020, June of 2020 specifically, forced an awakening, right? A fog lifted on a great mass of the population in the United States. Some of us had been woke already, but others needed to be woke and are trying to stay awake despite the news cycle. I want to pose to you a question as a researcher. What sorts of questions, how different have the questions become, and how different have your methods had to become in order to get to these new, deeper human truths where inclusion and diversity and representation matter so much?
Sure. Thank you, Myron. So as researchers, we looked inward first. And one of the very first things we did, so at VMLYR, we have a secondary research offering where we rely on a lot of external companies that bring research to us that we pay them for insights and data. And then we do our own research. On the secondary side, we started asking all of those providers, where are you sourcing your participants? What do those demographics look like? Who are you asking? We know that research panels tend to be white female. And so we wanted to be sure that all of the insights that we're bringing forward from the research that we purchase is a well-represented population and really has the rigor around it that we want to make sure that all voices are heard in the products and services that we're doing research on. When it came to the primary research side, we did a couple of different things. We stood back. We have a very open approach to our qualitative research where we do a lot of laddering and we allow participants a lot of space to talk about their thoughts and feelings and to really get to their underlying needs. But what we found was that all at once we needed to stand back a little more and allow space for things to develop into that uncomfortable area, especially for some of the clients that we had that were asking some tough questions about why minorities would come to a brand that they're offering when they historically haven't in the past. And we had to uncover some difficult truths about why those groups have typically not considered some of the products and services that we represent. And so it led to being willing to step up and ask the difficult questions that as a researcher, you really kind of have to always push the envelope, but also you have to stand back and allow that space and allow discomfort. And so you have to kind of sit in the discomfort and be willing to allow that uncomfortable statement to be made, and then also push a little bit forward and say, and how did that make you feel? And how did that change how you feel about the brand? So we changed that a little bit, but also we push our clients to view their BIPOC audiences differently, where, in the past, historically for Hispanic research, several of our clients have looked at their audiences as acculturated and unacculturated. And that's starting to be kind of an old viewpoint, because when you think about acculturation, it's turning immigrant communities into quote unquote, kind of whitewashed Americans. And we want to look at that experience differently and say, there's no requirement for you to integrate into this society to be an American. We want to meet you where your needs are. And we want to talk to you regardless of our goals, of the company's goals of where they want to take you. So that's just a couple of the things that we've done in these last 10, 12 months.
No, that's really insightful. And I think when we were talking about this, one of the things you shared was, an innovation in this space is talking to people in their native tongue, or having researchers that pose questions that speak like them, that sound like them, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's as English first, which allows you to get to some different nuance and texture in terms that things don't get lost in the translation. So I think that's an interesting advent in the space of research meeting and intersecting with inclusion and diversity and equity. So there's a strategic lens to this that we will dig into in a moment, that starts to bring all these different parts and pieces together. None of this is siloed. All of it functions, at the same time. But it's like the old school graphic equalizer. You start to slide certain knobs up and turn others down, depending on the sound that you want to achieve. And I think that that's one of the spaces and places where organizations need help. They may not have all the bands understood to get to the right frequency. And I think that that's where transformation at large comes into play. So Zack, you've been in a catbird seat this entire process, from raising your hand in early June to being a leader in this organization. Maybe you can share a little bit about what you're seeing as things to continue doing and things to watch out for as organizations take on challenges this wide and this broad.
Sure, absolutely. And I think the point you spoke to earlier about an awakening, I find myself very squarely in that. Not that I wasn't aware of racial injustice or systemic racism before, but after the murder of George Floyd, I really feel like the curtain was ripped away, and then I could no longer not do everything I could to try and make a difference in the world. And that's the approach we wanted to take as we set out together on transformation, right? If you view systemic racism as a monolith, it can be overwhelming. It feels like a big bad guy, and how do we take this down? But we took an opposite approach, a very organizational design approach, and we broke it down into different pillars and projects, right? It's about taking DE&I from being part of our DNA as a company to make it DE&I part of our everyday, part of every decision, part of every person, right? From our CEO, John Cook, all the way down to every individual contributor in the company. Everybody takes part and contributes to transformation, right? So when you take that approach and you break it down, it becomes manageable. It doesn't feel like you're boiling the ocean anymore. You can have small, dedicated teams working on specific goals, specific projects. And when that's happening, it kind of branches out, and you instead of seeing one big flag that notes to you that you've made progress, all along the way you're making progress in each individual step. So I think that's something we aim to continue to do, right? We need to look at every aspect of our business and every function or process of how we do it and determine how we can make it more inclusive, more equitable, more diverse in the truest senses of DE&I, right? And we really take that to heart by, and you said this as well, we're our first and most important client. If we can't do this within our own walls, how do we have the credentials to go help others? And we really take that seriously. And I mentioned all the way up from our CEO down, everyone is bought in, right? Another thing I would say that we should continue to do is to engage our hand raisers. There are many folks in the agency who feel inspired, have an idea, just want to help in any way they can, and they raise their hand and they come to us and they say, we would really love to be involved. And finding ways to match their skill set with the needs that we have on these projects has been unique, right? And this gives sort of an entrepreneurial spirit to the way we're approaching this, where every individual contributor takes their skills, their passion, and finds a way to move us forward, right? So, and the other final piece I'll end with on what we would continue would be collaborating. We go further together. We have incredible reach within the brands and the clients that we work with, and they have a lot of power and sway within this world. So helping them go along the same journey as us, hand in hand, we go further together. So I think those are really three key things that I would say we should continue as we move forward in transformation.
No, those are all great points, Zach, and thank you for sharing those. There are a few things that I think might get overlooked when you approach something this big and this broad, and you noted one, and that's, it may feel like you're boiling the ocean, but you really do have to just take small steps, right? And try to create a landscape, if you will, that has different pieces and parts that you can tackle, that you can better understand, that you can distribute ownership and authorship of for solutions and for accountability. It's the only way that you can democratize this work, because it as a former colleague of ours once said, sometimes it takes a village, other times it takes the entire world, and the challenge that we face is going to require that. Another point that was made earlier, and I think Julie made it, was about pushing the envelope, right? And that we have to push into places that are discomforting, because a lot of this has been discomforting for entire careers, and will continue to be so until we make changes. So I want to pivot a little bit and get into some group dialogue and discussion. And this first one is at this intersection of belonging. So Tasha, since you're back, I'm going to kind of pivot to you. When we talk about belonging in the workplace, with this being Pride Month and how we've shared Pride Month with this growing acknowledgement of Juneteenth, what does this moment mean for collective action versus individual recognition, or individual groups getting their shine or getting their moment? As we're talking about diversity, how do you see us, making better utilization of the time and attention that's available?
Yeah, so I think for us at VMLYR, we've done an incredible job and probably always have in terms of our overall culture. But now with our ERG groups, we formed a pretty tight-knit community within our ERG groups, but then that's actually pushed out and spilled out into the collective community and staff, right? And that's just of being able to afford us to have deeper conversations, to have educational conversations, and within a space that's respectful, challenging at times, because if we're pushing against some of the ways and some of the thinking and behaviors that have been constant for decades, we know that it's going to ruffle some feathers and people are going to, be off-put. But the fact that we keep pushing against those hard conversations and we keep pushing against the why the collective groups need to have their voices heard, and even inviting people to join in on celebrations, on achievements, on heritage months, everybody coming in, whether or not you even understand, you tend to find out more because you're connecting as a community together, right? And so I think that's what has been really pivotal for us, especially when we talk about some of the communities and the intersectionality that happens, that sometimes it's planned, sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes you find out things about colleagues and coworkers or people in a particular community that you weren't aware of. And that intersectionality and making that clear and acknowledging that and helping people to continue to say, not only am I XYZ, but I'm also XYZ, whatever that means. So, you know, the humanity in that, I think has been a really nice surprise for us as a business to see how much we've been able to move and change, because the connection across whatever community and the humanity in that makes all the difference, which makes people work differently, which makes our output different, which makes our creative work more impactful, all of it. So we're benefiting in every way because of that.
Wow, that's a beautiful sentiment, Tasha. And that connecting across communities, understanding the intersectionality. Sometimes I get caught up a little bit because I have, like, every group that we talk about representing or underrepresenting, I have in my family. They are in my home. You know, they are people I care deeply about. I have Asian Americans in my family, right? And LGBTQ people are in my family, right? And so and beyond. I have a white son. So when I think about what we're doing as work, I do translate that into my lived experience. And I also say, and you've heard me say, that we don't want to be overly self-referential. Like, even though I have a very diverse life, it doesn't mean that it's the only story. And we have to be careful about centering on a singular story. And I think this is a really good pivot as we welcome Teresa to the conversation. Good to see you. You made it.
Yes.
I think this is an interesting pivot to talk about strategy broadly, but also talk about culture specifically. So Teresa, as a critical member of the Culture Studio, which is a VMLYR strategic studio, talk about the risk of the singular story, and maybe talk about why inclusion experience is going to help us break away from that risk, that threat, and get a more a better baseline to start the work from.
Okay. Thanks, Myron. Apologies for joining our discussion a little late due to tech issues, but you know, there is a risk or a danger of a singular voice or a singular story. That risk is that you are excluding some of the most valuable customers and consumers that you could have. You run the risk of excluding some of the most vocal champions for your brand, as well as opportunities for revenue growth and for sustainability of your brand and your business. You know, when we look at where America is going, where the market is going, we know that our consumer marketplace is definitely more diverse now than it ever has been before, and it will only continue to become more diverse. So having a singular voice or a very narrow focus really is very exclusionary and leads to scarcity. So that lack of growth, that lack of opportunity is definitely on the path to that more narrow focus. But when you are able to broaden your vision and include more people, you are then opening up the doors for more of a growth opportunity and a growth mindset. So culture is one of the ways that you can really open the doors for more people to engage with your brand and with your business in general. Culture is that set of values and conventions and social processes that really permeate everything we do. It's how we show up in the world, how we navigate the world, and how the world navigates with us. And culture is very dynamic. There are several dimensions of culture, and each one of those is very measurable. So you can definitely take a look at where culture was years ago, where it is now, and even be a little predictive in terms of where culture is going to go and where it's going to lead us. So when we do a deeper dive into those different dimensions or dynamics of culture, you get to find some really interesting opportunities for brands to intersect. When you look at ideologies or food, behavior, when you take a look at language even and attitudes, there are ways for brands to bend and flex in order to meet people where they are and take them along the journey, or go along the journey with those consumer segments. And that's what I love about the work that we're doing in inclusion experience. We are opening up the aperture so that brands can see more and have more of an opportunity to connect with consumers. We do take a look at those, very typical markers of diversity when we look at culture, but we also layer onto that, the history and the systems and structures that really give insight into how today's consumers really navigate their access to products and services in the marketplace and leverage their collective power. So it's a nuanced approach to looking at consumers and looking at new ways to position our brands, but it's also a rich and robust area as well. Lots of opportunity for brands to show up authentically, or even if they don't have permission yet, they can figure out how to go about getting that permission to speak authentically to the consumers that they know will lead to that growth that they're looking for. I think you're on mute, Myron. Oh, okay.
Hey, Teresa, while we're trying to get Myron off mute, I just wanted to add on to that what you were talking about, in the research studio, we see a lot where you have a product that appeals to two very different audiences, and that we have to understand how to talk to both of those audiences. For instance, we have a brand that is particularly appealing to young African-American men, and it's also appealing to older, affluent white women. And, you've got to look at two very different need states there. And how do we develop a marketing plan that meets those people at their needs in both of those places? And so I think that that's kind of one of the things you were mentioning with really bringing brands along and talking to the whole group of people that are buying their products, not just one group.
Yes, exactly. One of the things I love about the way we go about doing that, about finding those nuanced ways to communicate with consumers is, and I'm not going to give away everything, but one of the ways I love for us to do that within the Culture Studio is to really take just a few moments to think about that consumer segment. What are the top of mind things that come to you when you think about, the affluent Caucasian woman or the African American male? One of the things I love about that is that it really helps to highlight some unconscious bias. So the things that we may think of first may not be the right things. So when we get all of those things out at the very beginning, we can then do deeper dives with the research studio on really validating those opportunities. Is this a valid reason? Is this a valid assumption that we're making, these top of mind assumptions that we're making about particular consumer segments? And if yes, great. And if no, guess what? We've just learned something, and that takes us to a different path. So I love going through those really quick one-hitter exercises to really get us to new places, because again, you could highlight some biases that we didn't even know we had about those particular segments. Prove and disprove, and then make sure we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and I love that, Julie and Teresa. And something I just like to add from the experience design side is it ties into all these things here. So something that I feel that's very important is the concept of being able to, as we're thinking about experiences, to focus on the exclusion and look for the people who are most mismatched, the most excluded people, and you lean into that. Because from the XD side, if you focus on how people are excluded, then it's going to naturally, if you can solve their problem, you're going to solve problem for the broader group. So that's something to be very important to think about. And it ties into, again, how do you create diverse solutions that create this sense of belonging for everyone and not a one size fits all. So that's,
I
to
love
me, that's
that,
very
Lewis.
important
And
as
it's
well.
really talking about, telling these human-centered stories through atypical truths. And the key word there is truth. You can validate that. Again, through research, you can validate that through testimonials from customers, from their experiences. You can validate those, and you know that they're right on target because you are meeting those particular needs. And like you said, when you solve for that excluded or that very niche, most specific opportunity, when you solve for that, in order to do that, you're really cutting through everything else. If you think about this being like the Earth's core, when you go back to elementary and middle school, and the very center, in order to get to that very center, you have to go through everything else, all the different layers. So when you solve for that center most need, that most specific, you are solving for the greater audience. And that's the magic of human-centered design, human-centered thinking, and really the culture studio as well. I love that. It's so magical when we get there.
And I think that point really speaks to something that we've been keeping in our hearts for inclusion experience. And it's the fact that we know by 2044, the United States will, for the first time, be a multicultural majority. And we use this as one of our proof points for inclusion experience because outside of this work being the morally just and right thing to do, there is business sense. As marketers, as advertisers, we need to reach the broadest group we can. We can't ignore large segments of our population. And as we get closer and closer towards the multicultural majority that we're heading towards, that's more important than ever. And in getting to those real truths and not having one truth that we try and blanket on everybody is so important and so key to everything that we're doing, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And a lot of what you all are touching on, I love because, again, we're focusing internally and externally. We're focusing on the work we have to do as a business, as an agency. And I think part of what people may not understand is when we mean we're doing the work, we mean we're doing audits for our policies, our process. How are we working with, suppliers, in terms of diversity? How are we working with looking at our data and how are we measuring? And then we're taking that externally. So it's a full circle, right? And there's always going to be different points where we're doing better in one area than in another, but we always keep pushing, right? And so I'm so glad to hear how much we're continuing to think about the humanness of things, right? And it's I think more and more talked about. We all knew about human-centered design and how research can uncover, some of the insights when it comes to human behavior. But I think the more and more this language is used, and the more and more we really understand what it could mean and where it could take us, I think we're going to be that much more prepared to help with our focus and our commitment around the inclusion experience as a capability of the agency.
Yes.
I think,
And
Tasha,
I would just, sorry, Julie.
That's fine. Go ahead.
I was just gonna just tag along to that for just a moment, Tasha. When you talk about the human experience, a part of that is also failure. And in order for us to really make progress on this journey, we have to not be afraid of failure. Failing forward, failing fast, and also leveraging those failures as opportunities for us to continue to make progress. To your point, we're not always going to get it right in each and every area. We're not going to be firing on all cylinders at all times. So giving ourselves the grace to know that that's going to happen, and then the permission to then take those learnings and leverage them elsewhere, because that's what they are. They're simply learnings that are going to help us in the next iteration, the next process, the next opportunity, the next consumer segment, the next brand. So knowing that there's going to be an element of failure and accepting that is sometimes difficult, but along this journey, it's a requirement. It provides those opportunities for more learning and more sharing.
So it looks like we have a question on the floor. Tasha mentioned ERGs earlier. So Tasha, can you talk about the importance of that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for our organization, but many organizations have ERGs, and ERGs are typically created and formed by interest of a particular group or staff group, particular community. When we came together in merger a couple of years ago, so I'm from the former YNR side, and there was the former VML side, and we came together in merger in 2018. And I now co-lead our diversity, equity, and inclusion practice with a woman by the name of Suba Nataraja. And when we came together, one of the things that we started to do was build frameworks to help support anyone who wanted to be a part of a community or start an ERG. And where we're finding as they've evolved and they've grown, and we've added so many different ERGs, right? So we started with women at VMLYR. We started with DEI in creative, DEI in tech. We started with Illum, which was for our BIPOC community. And we had our LGBTQ group. And since we started those groups back in 2018, we've now added, I think, 6 more. Right? We have a parenting and caregiver group. We now have a group called Chai There, which is the Jewish cultural group. We have another group that has actually split out of our BIPOC group. So now they're segmented in by way of community identity. So the Hispanic Latinx, to the African American and the Black ERG, to our B East, which is our Asian community group, and Spirit, which is our Native American Indigenous group, right? And so these things we didn't come up with. The staff decided that it was important to have that connection and that sense of belonging together. And then it's also inviting allies to be a part of that. So those conversations and those connections, I think we would not be able to do the work that we do as a business if people didn't feel like they were connected at work. And by way, especially since COVID, being virtual, those communities have been stronger and have made things a lot easier for people because they do have connection at work outside of their roles. And we're learning a lot from these communities who are also voicing opinions about, we need to speak up more about this in the business. We need to address these challenges because what happens outside in society comes in. So it's always better to address it and let people talk about it and be clear about it and share and educate each other and push against the uncomfortable conversations that need to happen so that we can get to actually do, again, better work and be connected as humans. We're all humans first, right? So the ERGs are critical to our culture. I think so much more so than we even thought they would be when we first started them.
And absolutely, and I'll back out. I know we're almost at time, and I think I'll channel my inner Myron. Our ERGs can also become ad hoc insight panels for us. And what I mean by that is, let's say we have a client who wants to run a Pride activation for Pride Month, and they say, we're not really sure if the creative tone or how we're presenting this is really right. Do you have anyone with a perspective from the community? We can say, well, absolutely we do. We can pull in key team members from our LGBTQ plus ERG and get those insights real and in real time, and they're so honest. So I know we're at time. Myron, I think you're back to wrap us up here, hopefully. We appreciate everybody for joining today, and we appreciate the Can Diversity Collective Inkwell Beach for inviting us all from VMLYR to speak today. We really appreciate the opportunity, and we hope to engage with you all in the realms of inclusion experience.
Well done.
I stole your shine, I'm sorry.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Like I said, grace, patience, empathy. Like we've all overcome more than some internet, more than some computer screens, and we'll continue to do so. Thank you to the to CCDC for opening this moment up for us to share. I know we're at time. Thank you each for your contributions, not just today, but for the last year and even before that, being champions for this effort before we even put structure to it. I look forward to what we'll accomplish in the days and weeks ahead and the years ahead. So onward, upward, and we'll turn it back over to you, Adrian. Thanks so much.
That was indeed an incredible conversation. Thank you so much, VMLYR, for sharing. We'll have to invite you back again so that we can get all the clicks and ticks out. Maybe you'll come and join us in Martha's Vineyard for sure. We'll make sure we don't have any technical difficulties. But again, thank you for the panel. It was super exciting. We've got a lot of, energy around it, some great things about what to look for in the future. I love the analogy of how you have to go through things when you get to the core. Teresa, I'm like a science geek, so I really enjoyed that analogy of you have to go through something to get to what you really want. And I hope that everybody thinks about that and takes that as like a learning tool or lesson, that this journey is not easy. You have to fight through it and get through the muck and everything else to make sure that we are creating sustainable change. So again, thank you so much, Myron, Tasha, Teresa, Julie, and I'm forgetting Zack and
Lewis.
Lewis. Oh my God. So just thank you guys so much for the team, and we look forward to having you join us again. But if you can stay, coming up next, we have what I call 2020 prom season. It's all about the promises that were made in 2020 and organizations that have made promises. Have they delivered? Some tech companies, some marketing and advertising companies, but what have they done? Have any changes been made? And how are we moving forward with this journey? So hopefully you guys will join us at 11 o'clock. But in the meantime, take a quick break and we will see you soon. Thank you guys so much for joining us.